News, play breakdowns, power rankings, storylines you never hear talked about anywhere else. It's all straight shots here, fired by straight shooters. S and Gunn. This is the Objective Basketball Podcast.
Welcome back to the Objective Basketball Podcast. S here, Lauren joining me as always. The NBA is back, folks. It's here. I tried to watch 15 games yesterday, but the NBA, because it likes to start every game at the exact same time, makes it very hard to do so. I was keyed in on Raptors Wolves. You were keyed in on Mavericks Spurs, where we saw an enigmatic rookie big take over the Rookie of the Year race in Derek Lively Jr.
I appreciate it. I'm glad we couldn't even get 5 minutes in without mentioning Derek Lively.
Of course.
I appreciate it.
I feel like there were a lot of great games last night.
Mm-hmm.
So far, I think there's been like 17 games, and they've all been, they've all had their interesting wrinkles to them. But I feel like Mavs Spurs was fun in its own right because obviously Wemby's debut. And then on the other side, you have all the questions around the Mavericks, Luka and Kyrie, how the defense is going to look, Lively coming in, the starting lineup. Why is Josh Green not in the starting lineup is my question. Maybe we'll get to that in a little bit. But ultimately, like, what were your main takeaways from Mavs Spurs?
Yeah, I think aside from the obvious with Derek Lively, I guess we should start there for anyone who maybe hadn't seen it.
Sure.
The confidence that he played with, it was sort of shocking to see it so early in game one, because sometimes you see rookies that are confident, but they still have this like frazzled energy about them, but he didn't. He looked very calm. He played very well alongside Luka. He was obviously listening to him and Kyrie as well. So it was just really nice to see him. Like from the second he got in there, you could feel it change the game, and so that was amazing to see on night one. And I hope that they make that starting lineup change starting next game. It's not the type of thing that needs to sort of be like, oh, well, we'll just base it on matchup. In my opinion, the continuity is important. You have got to just hit the ground rolling with that and move on from there. Tim Hardaway Jr. Go ahead.
My thing here is like, why not start him and Kleber both? Like, why can't you do that? Like, yes, you go a little bit big, but I think it gives you two different rolling options. Kleber is more of a pick and pop guy. Lively, obviously. I mean, he did his best Tyson Chandler impression last night. And I think
no kidding.
The comp is very clear, just in terms of like the rim running, the shot blocking, et cetera, et cetera. I think ultimately, like, that's the mold he's kind of leaning towards anyways. Luka was clearly really impressed with him last night too. I just think like you can play those types of players together, right? And it's not like Kleber is this slow, like not switchable type of defender. If anything, he's really good on that end, right? He can guard multiple positions for you. I think you could go bigger. Like if and if the issue is size and length, then like go double big,
Yeah, and I'm glad that you said that, because I think a lot of people right now would say, "Oh, well, they want to start Grant Williams at the 4." And that's true, but the whole point of starting Derek Jones Jr. was to get more size, more athleticism. And I like Derek Jones Jr. I like the fit. I think he's going to play a decent role for the Mavericks this year. Yeah. But if you want to have that size, I agree with you. I think looking at Maxey and kind of looking how that could work, and you have the lob threat, pick and roll, and also the pick and pop threat with Maxey, you can go big and you can still have Grant Williams in there, and he may just not play the 4. And sometimes, I mean, you saw him, and I think a lot of people saw him get switched on to Wemby and get assigned to guard Wemby at certain points of the game. And so if they want to be selective with the defensive matchups like you would expect, they can still do that while rolling out a bigger lineup that does include Maxey. And so I thought it was interesting to see Maxey kind of get the nod on night one. I'm not sure what that means from when you're kind of looking forward to the whole season, how they view him as a starter, a potential starter. But if they want to go big and they have that same logic with Derek Jones Jr., I think they should be asking the same question about Maxey Kleber.
Yeah, especially because Kleber can space the floor. Derrick Jones Jr. can't. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
and for all of his lob abilities and whatnot, I think Derek Lively can do a lot of that stuff that Derrick Jones can do, and like he gives you bigger size on that front. And I think Grant can play the three. Like he can guard, he can stay with threes a little bit.
Yep.
Obviously depends on what type of three. But ultimately, yeah, I think that could work. And by the way, those are the type of guys that are going to give Wemby trouble. It's the big bruiser type that can kind of be low center of gravity. Like, I won't be surprised if there's going to be a moment where, like, I don't know, Kyle Lowry gives Wemby problems just because, big body type. Like, he's gonna have issues. I think those are the types of guys that are gonna affect Wemby in that type of way. Wemby also got in foul trouble. He finished off the game with, I think, 15 points. And look, it's his debut. It's his first game. The overreactions will overreact, but he clearly showed off tons of potential in the preseason, in the regular season. Even in this game, I think there were moments where it's like, whoa, this is different. This is something very unique to its own. And like, he's going to have to develop into that. He has to figure out the fouling issue. We were talking about it last night, but like, some of the things that happen with Wemby is that he doesn't know he's in the space he's in because he's so long. Like, he'll accidentally have a handout and that will be a foul just because he has a handout. You know what I mean? So some of that is figuring out just positionally where you're going to be and how you're going to involve your just limbs, So yeah, that's the big question I have on the Wemby front. I'm not too like worried, if you will, after one game. How was Wemby from your perspective?
Yeah, it's crazy because we obviously all know how talented he is, but when you're watching the Spurs and not just the pieces that they have around him, but you take you have all those pieces in the back of your mind, and they're solid players, but then Wemby gets the ball and you just immediately want the ball out of his hands because it doesn't really matter if Derek Lively and his ridiculous wingspan is on him, and Lively can move his feet. So it doesn't matter if it's Lively, Maxey, Grant. There are certain points where if he gets a shot off, there's nothing you can do. And most of the time it went in. And so that was like, it was sort of shocking to see a rookie have the confidence, but also just the ability to say, oh yeah, like you're in my face right now. There's a hand in my face and there's nothing you can do. And so that was pretty insane. But as far as concerns with him, I don't have any concerns with him or after night one from like a reactionary standpoint.
It's tough. It's tough to have any real tangible concern. We'll see, like, 30 games in, even a season in, it's so hard to get any sweeping kind of just statements out of one single game. Right. I will say, I think one of the statements I have is just that this Spurs team is really fun. Like, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Zach Collins, Jeremy Sohan. They had guys like Trey Jones come out and play well. Cedi Osman had I think he had 12 or 13 off the bench. Yeah. They have some spunk to them. You know what I mean? And maybe I underestimated how good this team could potentially be just because of Wemby's impact. I'm not saying they're going to be a play-in team. I don't think they're going to be a play-in team. And I think ultimately when the going gets tough, they're probably lean the other way. But I wouldn't be surprised if instead of being a 25 win team, instead of being a 26 win team, they're a 32 win team. Yeah. You know what I mean?
I'm with you there.
Maybe. I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I could see a world where Devin Vassell looks like he did last night. I mean, he works so well. Yeah, exactly. He works so well off of Wemby. These curling actions, the dribble handoffs, the pin down stuff that they were running for him. Keldon Johnson is great as a 3-point. He's a great shooter as well. That all pairs really well with Wemby. And then you have Sohan, who is, this playmaker, do-it-all type. I just think they have a really fun core. That team, really, regardless of how many games they win, is going to be interesting to watch. What were your observations about that Mavericks defense, though? Because what did they give up to the Spurs? 119 points.
Look,
at the end of the day, they outscored them. Luka had 33. Kyrie had 22. They got a lot of points off of the bench. I think they scored 40 poinds off of the bench. They did what they had to offensively. But the defensive side of the ball, how'd you feel? How'd you feel about it?
It was not good. It was not good. And at the beginning of the game, it was kind of disheartening because they have had significant roster turnover
Mhm.
this last season, and that was priority number one, was the defense and the size and the athleticism. And I felt pretty solid about the guys that they brought in. I still feel solid about them, but it almost looked like they were disconnected. And it's the type of thing, in my opinion, that you hope self-resolves with some time, and again, emphasizing the continuity. But there were just some times where I'm like, there were a couple of moments that looked like a lack of effort. There were a
Mhm.
couple of moments that I was like, okay, that's kind of basic communication. There's no, this is the Western Conference.
Yeah.
There's no
You
time.
can't have any slippage. Yeah,
Yeah, no
exactly.
nights off. And so it was frustrating, but I also was like, they need a solid lineup. They need continuity with the lineup. Even the bench guys, like what groups they kind of run with,
Mhm.
just building the overall continuity, I think is going to help with the communication, because I do think that they have enough guys in Grant Williams, Josh Green, Maxey, Derek Jones Jr., Omax, Derek Lively, enough guys to kind of bridge the
Yeah.
gaps defensively. So I think that they will get there. But last night, to start the game, I can't remember. I was having trouble finding how much they gave up in the first quarter. I think it was like, it was a lot. It was a lot. And Luka mentioned it in the post-game press conference, and it sort of just like sucked the life out of the team, and they were spending the whole game catching back up. And so,
God damn, you were not wrong. They gave up 43 points in the first
43.
quarter.
It was hard to watch, because it's like, okay, I mean, the Spurs have solid players, but for this to be the tone that you set, that you're
Mhm.
allowing in quarter one of game one of the season,
Yeah.
not looking good. And so it was good to see them kind of be resilient and hang in there so they could close it out. But yeah, you can't be giving up 40 plus points in a quarter.
Yeah, that's not going to go very well.
It was kind of crazy to watch.
And like it's also you have to consider, like, this is a young Spurs team that they gave 40 points to, and like I understand, we just talked up, how fun this Spurs team can be, maybe how competitive they'll be, but ultimately, like, they're one of the worst teams in the West, right?
Yeah.
How is this going to look against the Nuggets, right? On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you're going to give up 150 points on that night. You know what I mean? Are you going to be able to score 175 points, Lauren Gunn? That's the question.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Ugh,
interesting enough, I think like that game, sort of showed you what the potential is for both teams, how they're trying to win also. And I think it'll be interesting to see, the minute restrictions for Wemby, how he looks on the foul front. That's obviously going to be something that, you got to keep your eye on, if you will. Maybe hold off on the defensive player of the year takes for now, but it is what it is. It's fun. Let's rock with it. It's the early season reactions and kind of like the overreactions for everything that we've seen. Speaking of overreactions, the Toronto Raptors are the number one seed in the Eastern Conference. They're one. They're 1-0. Toppling the Giants, the Minnesota Timberwolves. They are huge. They are a big team with Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns. They were missing Jaden McDaniels, who's another really big player for them. But it was a good game. It was an interesting game. The Raptors won 97-94. And that's how they're going to try to win pretty much every game. It's the gritty, let's stop this team. Let's try to limit as many points in the paint. Let's try to, obviously pressure the paint as much as possible on the other end. Let's force turnovers. They forced 14 turnovers for Minnesota and got 34 fast break points. Like, this team, Lauren, is going to be the best transition team in the NBA. Like, by far. They are going to just run the hell out of the ball. Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, OG, all those guys are like, they can feast on that end, right? Mm-hmm. Dennis Schroeder was really good for them in his debut. I got a fun little stat for you from Raptors PR. He is the first Raptor since Kawhi Leonard to drop 20 plus points in his Raptors debut. Ooh. So just high expectations, if you will.
Yeah, I like it.
I know. He even laughed about it. He's like, let's not do that. Let's not throw that type of expectation out there.
I like it.
And I feel like, from listening to Schroeder's postgame, he kind of he kind of seemed like he knew in the back of his mind what the expectations were for this team, but he couldn't really say it out loud. Like, he was listing off the players that he had on the roster, and then afterwards he kind of gave a smile. He's like, yeah, we're trying to win games. So it's just it's just funny to me. But ultimately, like, that's the way the Raptors are trying to win. It's, generating a lot of points off turnovers. It's getting out and running. It's making sure that their defense is where they're hanging the hat on, and where their identity lies. I think that's a really clear-cut way to do it too, because between between Scotty Barnes, who had a career-high 5 blocks last night, Precious Achiuwa, guys like that, Pascal Siakam, obviously, it's very clear-cut that this team can be elite on the defensive end. You take 2 of those guys and put them on the Mavericks, that team is very different. You know what I mean?
I can dream.
Yeah, exactly. But ultimately, like, I think that's something that you got to watch for the Raptors. And, they struggled in the half court again. This was pretty much the exact same type of game that they wanted to win. Like, if there was a kind of pathway for them to do this every single game, they would. This is the way that they want to win. It's like getting teams to score less than 100 points a game. It's like scoring half of their points in transition. Like, that's the way they want to play. And it worked out in game 1. Let's see how that looks against different competition, against less size in Minnesota, maybe against a more switch heavy team, maybe against a team that has just more offensive firepower. I think Minnesota also is dealing with some of their kind of quirks offensively last night. They still have to deal with the wonky spacing issues of Cat and Gobert and how they're going to work that out. But ultimately, I think like Minnesota is going to be fun this year. I think they showed that like they can be a really, really potent defensive team. And they didn't even have J-Mac in the lineup last night. So yeah, fun game.
If I can ask, what were your thoughts on Grady's debut and the fact that he only played 2 minutes?
He's not going to play a lot. I don't think
you don't think so?
Yeah, I don't think he's going to play a lot. Well, at least I would say I would be pretty surprised if he gets like consistent run in the first 20 to 40 games. I think second half of the season, maybe there's a trade or two, to kind of change up the bench a little bit. Yeah. And he gets more opportunity in the second half. I really would be surprised if he got real opportunity in the first half.
Got it.
Chris Boucher didn't even play last night, and Otto Porter Jr. didn't play last night. And, those are guys that I thought would be in the rotation to start the year, but they just have so many front court players. You think of Precious Achiuwa, you think of obviously Scotty OG, Pascal, all those guys, but it's just tough to find minutes for all of these guys. And I think I lean towards, even if it's not a massive Pascal trade, even if it's not a massive OG trade or whatever, something has to go down with this team to give it just a tad bit more roster balance. All respect to Malachi Flynn. That's my guy. We interviewed him last year, but like you need a little bit more guard help. And while I think they are kind of giving some of the responsibilities to him off of the bench, you need another guy as well. And if you can find that guy, I don't know. Earlier today, we were talking about like TJ McConnell as like a potential guy off of the bench, maybe Boucher for McConnell type of thing. But like just something like that to give you a little bit more roster balance and then be able to, get more Grady Dick minutes in there. You know what I mean? But he was all right. Like he had a nice cut. He played for 2 minutes, didn't shoot the ball. I think he had a reverse layup that he missed, but that was it. It wasn't anything too special. That's the Toronto Raptors angle of things. It was interesting. Just like seeing how they wanted to play and like how grueling it is, but ultimately a very different game than the Mavericks Spurs one.
What were your thoughts on the new coach, the new system, seeing it in like a full real game that matters?
They had 27 or 28 assists on 36 made shots. So like they were moving the ball a lot, which is very different from last year. If that stays the same way throughout the course of the season, pretty cool. That's like a very, very different way to play. And I think it'll help them in the half court. Like they were the second last half court team last year, offensive efficiency wise. If they can get it to like even like middle of the pack. Yeah, it was them and the Rockets. Those were the two worst half court
I did not realize that
in the league. And like if they can even get it to like middle of the pack, that would be a huge improvement for this team. And I think they can get that just by like moving the ball quicker, getting their guys to move a little bit quicker too. Yeah. I think that's ultimately it. I mean, they loved it, man. Darko was, he got celebrated. He had like the ice bucket shower.
I did see that.
I don't know if you saw. Yeah, but he had it was a good time, good vibes. Vibes are back in Toronto. That's mostly the case.
That's a big deal.
It was shaky last year. I mean, from what I've heard, from what everything I've kind of like the tea leaves, if you will, there was a lot of animosity, to say the least, in that locker room last year. Changing the vibes around is obviously a huge part of this process. So
sure.
They look good. They look good.
Good.
I'm more optimistic about the season now than I was last month. And like,
really?
I'm not, yes. Yeah. I'm not saying like optimistic in the sense that they're going to be the top 4 seed in the East or whatever, but I think they could be a frisky play-in, playoff, maybe playoff team, and give someone like a nice little scare in the first round. You know, I think that's possible. A month ago, I did not have that expectation. I think they were going to bottom out and, you know, different story. But they look better. They look like they've bought into the system, which is a huge plus to kind of
that's a big part
look
of it,
at
for sure.
Anything else you have takeaway wise? What other games have you kind of been scrolling through to see what's out there? I watched the first half of the Rockets Magic game.
Okay.
And the Rockets look rough, man.
Really?
That's my first overreaction is that like, I remember we had this conversation of how it could look great, but it could also be a complete disaster.
Yeah.
It's the initial overreaction here is that it's a disaster and it looks really bad.
Yikes.
Yeah. They gave up like your Mavericks. They gave up like 40 points in the first quarter or something like that. They were down
by like 30, right?
They lost by 30, in Orlando. And Orlando looks really good for that part, like Franz and Paolo and them. Really good. Yeah, but I just, it was ugly.
Oof. I caught Atlanta Charlotte. I watched that a bit because I wanted to see Brandon Miller and I wanted to see obviously LaMelo, but I really wanted to see Mark Williams because obviously very different from the Derek Lively situation, but there are similarities in terms of sort of like high expectations, but not wanting to rush the process.
Right.
And so I wanted to see what he looked like because I saw him in a couple of preseason games and I was like, Mark Williams looks pretty good. And so I enjoyed kind of watching how he was playing with them and Brandon Miller looked solid. And so that game, I honestly didn't take away a whole lot of that, but because I was watching at the same time Boston, New York, and that I was pretty like, I need to see this. I need to see how this goes.
I haven't watched that yet. That's part of my pre-game kind of planning to get ready. How was that game?
It was good. It was close and it was competitive. RJ Barrett looked really solid, which that game, like, of the people that I would have expected to like really step up, you know, and put up a good line against Boston's defense, I wouldn't have thought it would be RJ, but it was. Okay. And so, I mean, he looked solid. Porzingis returning to Madison Square Garden again. He was on fire. Yeah. And so I'm kind of curious, like knowing how the Mavs Porzingis experience went, I'm curious to see what that looks like for him. And I've heard people talk about him, you know, in Dallas, he was the number 2 option. Now he's 3 at best.
4, yeah.
And so what's that going to look like over the course of a whole season? And so that's kind of what I wanted to see. And so it was good to see him come out firing on all cylinders because that's huge. But I want to see what they look like. I mean, you got Al Horford coming off the bench, who I think is going to handle that very well. But you got Derek White in a contract year, and now he's sharing with Drew Holiday. Like, there's a lot of
who's also in a contract year.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts there, and so I want to see what that looks like.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about this today who's a Knicks fan, and they were kind of begrudgingly complaining about Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, who struggled last night. But he was essentially saying like this Celtics team looks a little bit different just because of Porzingis and how he kind of throws a wrench in everything that they did last season, or maybe doubles down on what they did last season. I'm mostly just curious about the shot diet moving forward. Like, if you're just they were launching threes. Let me see how many threes they took last night. But like if they're gonna lean into this 3-point barrage, like, is that sustainable for a playoff run? They took 39 threes, so actually less than the Knicks. But ultimately, I'm kind of just curious. I almost lost my microphone there. I'm kind of curious just how much they lean into the shot diet stuff, and if they're able to diversify their offense a little bit more. This isn't a game 1 concern. This isn't even a game 40 or a game 82 concern. This is more of a playoff concern. But I guess that's the one thing I have about Boston. They are going to be a good team. Like, there's no question about that. They're going to be formidable. And the fact that the Knicks, kept it close. Emmanuel quickly was hooping. That's very cool. I'm excited to watch that game.
You'll enjoy that. It's a good one.
So I obviously, I'm assuming we both watched the opening night games and Lakers, Nuggets, and Suns, Warriors. Lakers are playing again tonight against the Suns. No Devin Booker, no Bradley Beal. But it's the first time KD and LeBron are going to play against each other in the regular season since like 2018, which is just ridiculous.
I didn't realize that either.
Yeah, absolutely wild. I think there are, despite the Nuggets winning that game and winning it pretty handily, like the Lakers pushed and they, made some runs here and there, but ultimately the Nuggets were just way too overpowering. I think there are a lot of positives to take away from the Lakers side of things because they still have a lot of, moving parts. You mentioned it with the Celtics of like how this is all going to fit together. I think the Lakers completely changed their roster in the summer. They're obviously bringing a couple guys back in Austin Reeves and Rui Hachimura and D'Angelo Russell, but you're adding Gabe Vincent, you're adding Christian Wood, you're adding Jackson Hayes, you're adding Taurean Prince, just like Cam Reddish even, right? These are all guys who you sort of have to get acclimated to, and it might take a while for this team to do that. But it kind of proved my point that this team is going to be able to survive a little bit more in the regular season because they just seemed really formidable as a defensive team. And then on the offensive side of the ball, it was interesting because LeBron only played like 26 minutes, 27 minutes. We talked about that on the podcast. It's like, how are they going to manage these guys' minutes and how is it going to look? I'm kind of curious to see how that looks through the first 25 games.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think with LeBron, it's sort of like you kind of will just have to take it for what it is. Like it's a wait and see kind of thing with the load management aspect of it. There were a couple of things that really surprised me. I don't want to say really surprised me, but I was shocked at how early they went to Christian Wood. I actually did not expect that. And then I also was shocked at Anthony Davis in the second half. Obviously there were a lot of big statements made. What were your thoughts about that? Because that was interesting to me.
I thought the Nuggets are a better defense than people expected. I just like,
that's probably a good way to put it. Yeah.
Like they are a very, very good defensive team. Not very good, but like they're good enough to kind of keep things afloat. I think Jokic, when he's locked in, can be a good defender. And they have a lot of size. Like, we were talking about the Timberwolves earlier and just how big they are. The Nuggets are really big too, right? Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, Jokic, even KCP and Murray. Those guys are like bigger guards. They have a lot of size. And I thought that maybe the Lakers adding some size in the offseason would maybe help counteract some of that. But, there's functional size and then there's size. And I think ultimately the Nuggets just have way more functional size. And I think that's like the biggest, not concern I have for the Lakers, but like, how are they going to utilize all of their quote unquote pieces? Like, what is this going to look like in its final form? That's something that has to sort of evolve as the season goes forward. But it's also interesting because I think the same thing can apply to Phoenix, right? Phoenix had this like rotating crew of guys just come in and play with KD and Booker on opening night. And it was just like, okay, some of these guys work, some of these guys don't. Like Eric Gordon really seamlessly fit in there. I thought there was moments where like guys like Yuta Watanabe fit in well. Josh Okogie had a really good game. Drew Eubanks was good. Yusuf Nurkic. I completely forgot. Like Nurkic had a really, really good game, and like his screening ability opened up Booker and Durant in a lot of ways. But how is that going to work? How is the rotating crew of guys going to work? It seems like their offense is going to be more than enough to just win games in the regular season. But final form, how does that look? Right.
Yeah. I mean, with Phoenix, the last time we talked about them, my biggest concern was something that you had mentioned with Toronto and the diversity on the roster in terms of having that balance. Yeah. And for me, probably the bigger concern was the ball handling and having that pure point guard. And you looked at Devin Booker and commented on him him being their point guard, and that
Yeah, he
being,
is like he
and
has
so
to be. Yeah,
he has to be. And so the way that they've kind of started establishing their offensive identity and continuing to build on that, I think sort of answered some of my concerns. I know it's obviously early and you never know, especially sometimes the injuries, which it looks like they're already starting to struggle with a little bit. You never know where the season is going to go. But seeing that right out of the gate for me was like, okay, that kind of tampers a little bit some of the concerns that I've
no
had.
pun intended. Very nice. Drew
Just had to
Eubanks,
throw that in
second
there.
round pick. Very nice.
You know, I real quick on that, have they always done the immediate draft pick, like second round draft pick, the most, like the closest one that you have available?
I don't know, because
I was like, oh man, 2024.
That's a good question. That's a good question, because what was it for Philly? Actually, no, Philly, it was the most recent one.
Was it really?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. So maybe it is the most recent one that they go with, and then funny for that to be the case with Drew Eubanks and tampering and whatnot. Speaking of tampering, I guess like we could talk about Harden a little bit here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so the report is that Adrian Wojnarowski, I think it was Adrian, I don't even know who reported it, but essentially the Clippers are done on the James Harden sweepstakes for now. They're kind of saying, hey, we'll talk about it later. Maybe we'll address it at some point. So that means no one is trading for James Harden, right? You know, there was that report that came out today that said, you know, the Sixers are telling James Harden to stay home, and they're not telling him to come, you know. So where does this even all end? Like, is he gonna play for the Sixers? You know, is tonight? Then I don't think he's gonna play tonight. But like, no. Well, he isn't. He actually isn't gonna play tonight because they sent him home. They said don't come. He's definitely not gonna play on Saturday against Toronto. Now, what is the end goal here for Philly? What is the end goal here for Harden? Because it just doesn't seem like there's any real tangible solution. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that the number one thing that I keep coming back to when I'm like, how is this situation going to play out, is the fact that if he holds out, it affects his ability to enter unrestricted free agency.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm like, if that wasn't a thing, if that wasn't taking place or a factor, then I would just expect him to continue to sit out until he moves on. So because of that, I'm like, how much pressure and also like, what kind of shape is he in? Because I really have no idea what the answer to that question is. And I at the same time, say he is in game shape. Say it doesn't take long for him to get ready to play a minutes restriction role.
Right.
The feelings around that situation, that's not something that you're going to want. And I mean, obviously you want the talent. You want Embiid to have the talent and to have a shot and be happy. But I think there's going to be so much animosity there. I mean, well, I'm not even going to open up that can of worms. I was going to say
the whole Embiid stuff.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, which situation do you think had more animosity, Ben Simmons or James Harden right now?
Ooh, I would probably. That's actually a good question. I don't know,
because I feel like the Ben one was so intense, but with James, it was like, this is our shot. This is really the shot to win.
Yeah.
And so at first I would say Ben, but now I'm like, well, the stakes seem to be a little bit higher, especially with the MVP year. So I really don't know how to answer that question.
I think with Ben, the fans were a big factor.
I agree with that.
The Philly fans were just on him, you know? And I think actually, if you were to ask Philly fans right now, most people would probably side with Harden. Like, if you go through quote tweets, if you go through like replies and stuff, people are asking for Daryl Morey to get fired.
Really?
You know what I mean? So maybe the, you know, court of public opinion, if you will, is leaning more Harden versus Morey, which is ironic because it just doesn't seem like that's the right way to, but at the same time, like, who knows, you know, there's the intricacies of these type of relationships. The way they falter is like so complex and brittle, and like, you know, it just it can change with any given mode. I will not be part of an organization that Daryl Morey is a part of. I repeat,
will never forget waking up and seeing that video. I was like, is this real? Is this a bit? That was insane.
Oh man, God. It's perfect. It's such a good meme. It, like, I use it if for anything. You could slot in Daryl Morey for literally anything else. Precious Achua is a lot, you know, whatever. Yeah, look, folks, that's it from our side. I guess the one thing I will say, the one question I had to ask you, we've got a chance to watch, I would say, most of the league now, or, whatever you've got the chance to see so far. What is your number one league pass team this season?
Man.
Outside of the Mavericks, obviously.
Outside of the Mavericks. Yeah. I'm going to say, let me think about this for a sec.
Okay.
It's such a cop-out answer, but probably OKC.
Damn you. I was going to say
Did I take your
OKC.
answer?
Yeah.
Okay, let me throw a different one.
Okay, sure.
My true second place league pass team is I'm going to probably say Orlando then. I think their guys one, I'm very interested to see how Jalen Suggs. In my brain that I've always got who's next on the chopping block,
right,
like who's becoming available. So there's that aspect to it as well. So I think probably Orlando. There's so much going on there, and they're an exciting team just at the surface level, not even diving into all that. So for you, it's OKC.
Orlando's fun. Yes, for me, it's OKC. So two O teams, but yes, OKC is. Yeah, I mean, look, I literally right after this podcast, I'm going to open up the OKC Bulls game and watch it in its entirety, just because I want to see. I want to see Chet. I want to see Shea, who seemed like he was on fire last night. Case and Wallace was hooping, apparently. Just like a lot of different things. They have so many different angles. Like Orlando, they have just so many different young and intriguing guys that you're like, I wonder,
Right.
And yeah, that's why they're so fun. And maybe both teams take the leap this year. You know what I mean? So that's why I love them.
When you're watching the game, you can see what prompted the post-game players only meeting in Chicago. Because I did not catch that game, but clearly it trumped up some feelings.
I saw DeMar DeRozan said something afterwards too. He said we were disrespected or something like that. Hold on, let me pull it up real quick.
I did not catch that quote.
It was a little bit of a fiery quote here. DeMar DeRozan, we got our asses kicked. Home opener. That's disrespect to us and disrespect to our fans. We won't let that happen again. So that is it.
Oh gosh.
Look, DeMar is entering a contract year. I'm sure there are people that would be willing to take on DeMar in a contract year, especially contenders who are interested in his services. Would not be surprised if that's a situation that pops off. If the Bulls get off to a slow start, maybe we talk about them as the blow up candidate versus Toronto, because
that's where I'm sitting.
And in the summer there were like the Levine rumors of like maybe they kind of toyed with the idea of trading Levine, but the price was so high. Like, hey, maybe there's something there, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think so. I think the biggest thing is DeMar being in a contract year, because if he wasn't, you might be able to try and like convince yourself, I guess. I still go back to the Vooch extension. I still don't understand that, but that's neither here nor there. I 100% think that it's reasonable to almost expect them to enter fire sale mode. And really the biggest thing is because of the expiring contract. If it wasn't, I wouldn't feel so like, oh, it's coming, but I sort of feel like that clock is ticking. And if it's getting to a point where not only are you dealing with all of those factors, but you're not winning and there's tension, please.
Yeah. I hear you. It's also like, man, if you look back at Bulls history since the D-Rose, Jimmy Butler era, it has been rough. It has. Really, really rough. The Jimmy Butler trade, you get Lauri Markkanen, you get Levine. You trade Lauri Markkanen, you trade Wendell Carter Jr. Both of those guys are doing very well elsewhere. They, and you obviously have the first round pick that I believe turned into Franz Wagner. It's just like it's tough right now for the Bulls. They feel like, I don't know, they feel like Manchester United. If I'm doing like a soccer, thing. Obviously, Manchester is so huge, but at the same time, the Bulls are huge. Like the Bulls are, hey, Chicago dynasty, 90s, they dominated, Michael Jordan, all that stuff. Yeah, exactly, right? And your top logo. Yeah, exactly. Shout out to the top logos, baby. Shout out to the Wizards logo for the real ones.
I stand by it. Same with the Wolves.
For people who don't know, Lauren said that the Wizards logo was a top 10 logo in the NBA. Please do yourself a favor and go Google the Wizards logo from right now. But yes, I don't know, man. Chicago's just, it must suck right now to be a Bulls fan. And funny enough, the Raptors are playing the Chicago Bulls on Friday. So I get to see that firsthand.
It'll be good.
Lauren, anything else before we head out of here?
No, I think we both have some intriguing seasons ahead of us. Both of our teams are sort of, I don't want to say in a state of flux because there's a negative connotation with that, but I think that
There's questions.
There's big questions, and I think that they are going to get answered, and I'm kind of excited for what that will mean for both of our teams that we follow so closely, because I think it's sort of gonna, both of them, what they do have in common is that it's going to kind of propel them into this next era, whatever that looks like.
Whatever that looks, and the whatever is what terrifies most people. But yes, I agree. The kind of deadline, whatever you have, is sort of, it's coming very quickly for both of these teams. So yes, thank you very much for everybody who's tapped into the Objective Basketball Podcast. Lauren, you're in Chicago right now, so you maybe go watch that Raptors game.
Might just have to hop down.
Or actually maybe sneak into the players only meeting and see what happens. Get a little exclusive
I'm
for
gonna mark
us.
my calendar. I'm sure there will be one.
Oh yeah, there's definitely gonna be a second one because they need it. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate you guys, and do all the liking and subscribing and things you guys always do, and appreciate you guys for tapping into the Objective Basketball Podcast. We'll see you guys later.
Follow hosts at Just S Baraheni on all socials and at the Lauren Gunn on Twitter. The Objective Basketball Podcast, delivering the NBA to you like no other.